The Uber driver handed me $10,000 at a red light and said, "Tell them you never saw me." The stack of $100 bills landed in my lap while I was checking my phone, and I looked up to see the driver's eyes locked on mine in the rearview mirror. His hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles had gone white, and sweat was running down the sides of his face despite the car's air conditioning being on full blast. "What the hell is this?" I asked, picking up the money like it might explode. The light was still red, and cars were lined up behind us on Montgomery Avenue, a typical Friday evening rush hour in the financial district. "Just take it," he said, his voice shaking. "When they ask you about me, about tonight, you tell them you never saw me. You got in this car and it was empty. You drove yourself, understand?" I didn't understand anything. I'd ordered an Uber to get home from my office building to my apartment across town, a 20-minute ride I'd done 100 times before. The app said my driver was Gerald, 4.8 stars, 7,000 rides completed. He'd picked me up 5 minutes ago. We'd exchanged the usual pleasantries about traffic and weather, and now he was handing me $10,000 and talking about people asking questions. The light turned green, and he accelerated through the intersection, but his eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, checking the cars behind us with the kind of paranoia that made my stomach tight. "I think you've got me confused with someone else," I said, trying to hand the money back over the seat. "I'm just going home. I don't know what this is about." He didn't take the cash. Instead, he made a sudden right turn without signaling, cutting across 2 lanes of traffic and earning angry honks from at least 3 cars. I grabbed the door handle to steady myself, the money still clutched in my other hand. "You're not confused," Gerald said. "You're exactly who I need. Someone random, someone with no connection to any of this, someone who can say they never saw me and actually be believed." His voice had a desperate edge that reminded me of my brother. Right before his gambling debts had gotten so bad, he'd tried to fake his own disappearance. That same quality of a man who'd run out of options and was making one last impossible play. "Look, I don't want to be involved in whatever this is," I said, my heart starting to pound harder. "Just take your money back and drop me off at the next corner. I'll get another ride." Gerald laughed, but it wasn't a sound that suggested anything was funny. "You're already involved. The moment you got in this car, you became part of this, and now your choice is simple. Take the money, tell them you never saw me, and walk away with $10,000 and no problems, or try to be a hero and end up destroyed." I looked at the money in my hands, then at the driver's reflection in the mirror. He was maybe 50 years old, graying hair, wearing a polo shirt and jeans, looking like every middle-aged guy who drove for Uber to supplement retirement income. Nothing about him screamed criminal or dangerous, but nothing about this situation made sense either. "Who's them?" I asked. "Who's going to ask me questions?" Gerald took another turn, this time into a residential neighborhood I didn't recognize. The houses here were old Victorians with peeling paint and overgrown yards, the kind of area the city had forgotten about decades ago. "The police, probably," he said. "Maybe federal agents. Maybe people who are worse than either of those. Depends on how fast this moves and who figures out what first." He pulled over to the curb in front of an abandoned house with boarded-up windows and a yard full of dead grass. The engine was still running, but he twisted around in his seat to look at me directly for the first time since I'd gotten in. 3 hours ago, I picked up a passenger from the downtown Marriott. Businessman, expensive suit, leather briefcase, going to the airport. Normal fare, nothing unusual. Halfway there, he gets a phone call. Starts talking in a language I don't recognize, getting more and more agitated. Then he sees something out the window, a car following us maybe, and he completely panics. He tells me to pull over immediately. We're on the highway, but he's screaming, so I get off at the next exit. He jumps out, leaves his briefcase in my back seat, and runs into traffic. I'm sitting there confused, and then I see the car that was following us. Black SUV with tinted windows, and it doesn't follow the businessman. It follows me. Gerald's hands were shaking now, and I could see the fear in his eyes wasn't an act. I drive away fast, thinking maybe I'm being paranoid, but the SUV stays with me for 20 minutes. I finally lose them in a parking garage downtown, and that's when I open the briefcase because I need to figure out what's happening. He reached into the center console and pulled out his phone, scrolling through photos before turning the screen toward me. The image showed the inside of a leather briefcase packed with bundles of cash, documents with official-looking seals, and what appeared to be several passports. "There's $200,000 in that briefcase," Gerald said, "plus documents that I can't fully read, but that have names and account numbers and locations. Whatever that businessman was involved in, it's serious enough that people are willing to follow me around the city trying to get it back." I stared at the photo, my mouth going dry. This wasn't just weird anymore. This was criminal. This was dangerous. This was something I wanted absolutely no part of. "So, turn it into the police," I said. "Drive to a police station right now and hand over the briefcase. Tell them exactly what happened. You're a witness, not a criminal." Gerald shook his head slowly. "I tried that. I called the non-emergency police line 2 hours ago," explained. "The situation? And you know what the dispatcher told me? She said to bring the briefcase to the 4th precinct and ask for Detective Larson. Specific name, specific precinct. That's not standard procedure. That's someone waiting for me." He put his phone away, and gripped the steering wheel again. So I started thinking about who that businessman was, why he had all that cash and those documents, why people were chasing him. And I realized something. The Marriott downtown, that's where the National Banking Conference is happening this week. Hundreds of financial executives from across the country, all staying at that hotel. My passenger wasn't just some random businessman. He was someone important, someone involved in something big. The pieces were starting to connect in my mind, forming a picture I didn't want to see. Banking executives, cash, documents, federal cases. This was money laundering or fraud or something that would make national news. That still doesn't explain why you're giving me $10,000, I said, though part of me already knew the answer. Gerald reached over and pulled a small notebook from his glove compartment, handing it back to me. Inside were names, dates, and notes written in cramped handwriting. When I realized how serious this was, I started documenting everything. Time I picked up the passenger, exactly what he looked like, the license plate of the SUV that followed me, the badge number of the cop I saw watching my apartment building when I drove past an hour ago. I made copies of some of the documents from the briefcase, and I realized I needed insurance. He pointed at the money in my hands. You're my insurance. In about 10 minutes, I'm going to drive to a specific location and hand over that briefcase to someone who can actually do something with it without getting killed. But before I do that, I need to establish an alibi, a story that makes sense if anyone comes looking. The story is this. You got in my car for a normal ride, and somewhere along the route, I started feeling sick. Chest pains, difficulty breathing, symptoms of a heart attack. I pulled over and told you to drive yourself the rest of the way in my car while I called an ambulance. That's why your fingerprints will be all over the steering wheel and door handles. That's why the GPS will show the car traveling to your apartment with me, not in the driver's seat. And that's why, when anyone asks, you'll say you never saw me after I got out of the car to wait for the ambulance. You drove yourself home, left my car parked on the street, and went inside. You never saw where I went or what I did next. The plan was insane, but I could see the logic in it. If Gerald was about to do something dangerous with that briefcase, he needed plausible deniability. He needed witnesses who could honestly say he wasn't where the authorities thought he was. And the $10,000? I asked, already knowing this answer too. That's your payment for sticking to the story, Gerald said, and your incentive to not ask questions you don't want the answers to. Take the money, drive yourself home, and forget this ever happened. Or refuse, and I'll drop you off right here. But you'll still be in the ride records. You'll still have been in my car tonight. And when the police start investigating, they'll find you anyway, except you won't have $10,000 and you won't have a story that makes sense. He wasn't threatening me exactly, but he was making the situation clear. I was involved now whether I wanted to be or not. I looked at the money again, feeling its weight in my hands. $10,000 would pay off my credit card debt completely, would cover 3 months of rent, would let me finally fix the transmission in my car that had been grinding for 6 weeks. I worked as a compliance officer for a mid-sized insurance company, reviewing policies and procedures for regulatory adherence, making $48,000 a year and living paycheck to paycheck in a city where rent alone took half my income. This money would change my immediate future significantly. But taking it meant lying to police, meant being part of whatever was about to happen, meant crossing a line I'd never crossed before. What if I say no? I asked, needing to hear him say it out loud. Gerald's expression didn't change. Then you say no, and I find someone else. But you're still going to be questioned because you were in this car tonight, and you won't have a good explanation for why you didn't help someone who claimed to be having a heart attack. You won't have the money, and you'll spend weeks or months dealing with investigators who want to know what you saw and heard. He checked his mirrors again, that paranoid gesture that suggested he expected someone to appear at any moment. I need an answer now. We don't have time for you to think about it. My hands made the decision before my brain fully processed it. I folded the money and shoved it into my jacket pocket, feeling the bulk of it press against my ribs. Okay, I said, my voice not quite steady. I'll do it. But I want the notebook too, the one with your notes. If I'm going to lie for you, I want to know what I'm lying about. Gerald hesitated, then handed over the notebook. Fair enough. But don't read it until you're home. Don't take it out of your pocket. Don't let anyone see it. And if someone does ask you questions, you don't mention that notebook exists. That's for your protection, not mine. The less you officially know, the better. He got out of the driver's seat and opened my door. Your turn. Slide over and drive yourself home. The address is already in the GPS. When you get there, park on the street, leave the keys under the floor mat, and lock the doors. I'll have someone pick up the car later tonight. I climbed over the center console into the driver's seat, adjusting the mirrors and trying to ignore how surreal this felt. Gerald was already walking away, heading toward the abandoned house with his phone pressed to his ear. I wanted to call out, to ask more questions, to understand what was really happening, but he disappeared around the side of the building before I could form words. I sat there for 30 seconds, gripping the steering wheel, the engine idling, trying to decide if I should just drive straight to a police station and explain everything. But Gerald's words kept echoing in my head. Someone was waiting for him at the 4th precinct. Someone who might not be trustworthy. Someone who might be part of whatever corruption he'd stumbled into. I put the car in drive and followed the GPS directions toward my apartment, my heart hammering the entire way. The notebook in my pocket felt heavier than the cash, full of information I didn't want but couldn't ignore. Traffic was lighter now, the rush hour surge fading into evening calm, and I made it home in 15 minutes without incident. My apartment building was a converted warehouse in the industrial district, cheap rent in exchange for thin walls and unreliable heating. I parked Gerald's car on the street as instructed, left the keys under the floor mat, and locked the doors. Walking into my building felt like crossing back into normal life, except nothing was normal anymore. I had $10,000 in cash and a notebook full of secrets that connected me to something dangerous. I made it to my third-floor apartment, locked the door behind me, and immediately pulled out the notebook to read. Gerald's handwriting was cramped but legible, filling 20 pages with details that painted a picture of systematic corruption. The passenger he'd picked up was named David Brennan, senior vice president at Coastal Federal Bank, attending the National Banking Conference downtown. According to Gerald's notes, Brennan had been scheduled to testify before a grand jury next week about financial irregularities at his bank, testimony that would implicate several high-ranking executives in a loan fraud scheme worth over $50 million. The briefcase contained evidence Brennan was planning to use in his testimony, evidence he was apparently trying to flee with when Gerald picked him up. The black SUV that had followed them belonged to a private security firm called Apex Protection Services, a company Gerald had traced back through public records to shell corporations that connected to Coastal Federal Bank's board of directors. Someone at the bank had hired private security to track Brennan and recover the evidence before it could reach federal prosecutors. Gerald had documented everything, including the names of 2 FBI agents who were supposedly handling the case, phone numbers for federal prosecutors, and a timeline of events that showed Brennan had contacted the FBI 3 weeks ago, offering to cooperate in exchange for protection. But according to Gerald's notes, something had gone wrong with that protection. Brennan had been staying at the Marriott under FBI supervision, but somehow Apex Protection Services had found him. Either the FBI had a leak, or someone at Coastal Federal had connections deep enough to compromise federal security. The notebook also contained copies of several documents Gerald had photographed from the briefcase before hiding it. Bank statements showing wire transfers to offshore accounts, loan applications with forged signatures, email exchanges discussing how to structure fraudulent transactions to avoid regulatory detection. This wasn't just evidence of a crime. This was evidence of a conspiracy involving dozens of people across multiple institutions. I sat on my couch, the notebook open in my lap, trying to process what I'd just read. Gerald hadn't just stumbled into a random situation. He'd accidentally become the custodian of evidence in a major federal case, evidence that powerful people were willing to kill, to keep hidden. And he'd given me $10,000 to provide him with an alibi while he did something with that evidence. The question was, what was he doing? Where had he gone after leaving me with his car? My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was simple and direct. Don't read the notebook in public. Don't tell anyone about tonight. Someone will contact you tomorrow with instructions. I stared at the text, my stomach knotting. Gerald was watching me somehow, or someone working with him was. They knew I'd gotten home, knew I had the notebook, knew I'd probably started reading it. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, wanted to shove the money and notebook into a box and pretend this wasn't happening, but I couldn't. I was involved now, deeper than I'd realized when I'd taken the cash. I spent the next hour pacing my apartment, trying to figure out my next move. The smart thing would be to contact the FBI directly, bypass local police who might be compromised, and hand over everything Gerald had given me. But that would mean admitting I'd taken money to lie about his whereabouts. Would mean becoming a witness in a federal case. Would mean my life getting complicated in ways I couldn't predict. The alternative was to do nothing, wait for tomorrow's contact, and see what Gerald or his associates wanted from me next. Keep the money, stick to the story, and hope this resolved itself without dragging me further in. I was still debating when someone knocked on my door, 3 sharp raps that made me jump. I checked the peephole and saw a woman in a dark suit, holding up a badge. "Federal agent," she called through the door. "I need to ask you some questions about a rideshare trip you took tonight." My blood turned to ice. They'd found me already. Less than 2 hours after Gerald had dropped me off, federal agents were at my door asking questions. I considered not answering, pretending I wasn't home, but that would only make things worse. I opened the door with the chain still attached. "Can I see that badge again?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The woman held it up closer to the peephole. FBI credentials, her name listed as Special Agent Nicole Hartley, photo matching her face. She looked to be in her mid-30s, blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, expression professionally neutral. "Mr. Coleman?" she asked, using my last name. "I'm investigating a situation involving an Uber driver named Gerald Price. Our records show you were his passenger this evening. May I come in?" I unhooked the chain and let her in, my mind racing through what I should and shouldn't say. The notebook was sitting on my coffee table in plain sight, and I casually picked it up and set it on the kitchen counter while gesturing for her to sit down. "What's this about?" I asked, sitting across from her and trying to project calm confusion. "Did something happen to Gerald?" Agent Hartley pulled out her own notebook and a pen. We're trying to locate Mr. Price in connection with an ongoing investigation. Can you walk me through your interaction with him tonight, starting from when you ordered the ride? I repeated the story Gerald had given me, adding details that would make it sound authentic. I explained that I'd gotten in the car for a normal ride home from work, that about 10 minutes into the trip, Gerald had started complaining of chest pain and difficulty breathing, that he'd pulled over and insisted I drive the rest of the way myself while he called for medical help. I described how I'd driven his car to my apartment, parked it on the street, and left the keys as he'd instructed. He seemed really scared, I added, which wasn't a lie. Kept saying he didn't want to die alone on the side of the road waiting for an ambulance. I figured the best thing I could do was follow his instructions and let him get help. Agent Hartley wrote everything down, her expression giving nothing away. "What time did you leave, Mr. Price?" she asked. "Around 6:30, maybe 6:40, right around sunset." "And you drove straight here?" I nodded. Traffic was light, took about 15 minutes. She made another note. "Did Mr. Price have anything with him? Luggage, briefcase, bags?" This was the dangerous question, the one where I needed to be careful. "Not that I saw," I said. "He travels pretty light for an Uber driver, just his phone and maybe a water bottle." It wasn't technically a lie since I hadn't personally seen the briefcase, but I was definitely omitting important information. Agent Hartley looked up from her notes. "Did he mention where he was going after you left? Did he say anything about meeting anyone or going anywhere specific?" I shook my head. "He was pretty focused on getting medical help. He gave me quick instructions about the car and then got out. That's the last I saw of him." There was a pause where she studied my face, and I forced myself to maintain eye contact without looking defensive. I'd spent 3 years as a compliance officer reviewing depositions and witness statements. I knew what evasive body language looked like, and I made sure not to display any of it. "Mr. Coleman, I need to be direct with you," Agent Hartley said. "Gerald Price is in possession of evidence related to a major federal investigation. That evidence was stolen from a crime scene, and anyone who helps him hide or transport that evidence is committing a felony." My heart was pounding, but I kept my expression confused and concerned. "I don't understand. Are you saying Gerald stole something? Because I didn't see anything like that." "I'm saying that if Mr. Price gave you anything tonight, anything at all, you need to tell me now. Documents, storage devices, money, anything. If you cooperate fully, we can work with you. If you lie, and we find out later, things will be much worse for you." She was giving me an out, a chance to come clean before this escalated. Part of me wanted to take it, to hand over the notebook and cash and explain everything. But Gerald's warning echoed in my mind. Someone was waiting for him at the 4th Precinct, someone who knew he was coming. If local police were compromised, could federal agents be too? "He didn't give me anything," I said, maintaining the lie. "I was just a passenger who ended up driving his car, that's all." Agent Hartley closed her notebook. "All right. If that changes, if you remember anything else, or if Mr. Price contacts you, call this number immediately." She handed me a business card with her name and phone number. "This is a serious investigation, Mr. Coleman. People's lives are at stake. Don't make the mistake of thinking you can help someone by keeping secrets." She left, and I locked the door behind her, my hands shaking now that the performance was over. I'd just lied to a federal agent. I'd obstructed justice in a major investigation. I'd crossed lines I couldn't uncross, and I didn't even fully understand why, except that Gerald's paranoia had infected me. I picked up Agent Hartley's business card and was about to throw it away when I noticed something. The phone number she'd given me didn't match the main FBI field office number I found when I Googled it. It was close, same area code and prefix, but the last 4 digits were different. That could mean nothing, an agent's direct line instead of the main switchboard. Or it could mean everything. It could mean Agent Hartley wasn't who she claimed to be. I grabbed the notebook and flipped to the page where Gerald had written down the names of FBI agents supposedly handling the Brennan case. Special Agent Nicole Hartley wasn't on the list. The agents Gerald had identified were named Thomas Reeves and Jennifer Kwan, both assigned to the Financial Crimes Division. So who was the woman who'd just left my apartment? Was she really FBI, just not part of the Brennan investigation? Or was she someone else entirely, posing as federal law enforcement to track down Gerald and the evidence? I pulled out my phone and dialed the main FBI field office number, my hands still trembling. A receptionist answered, and I asked to speak with Special Agent Nicole Hartley. "One moment," the receptionist said, and I heard typing. "I'm sorry, we don't have an agent by that name at this office. Can I direct your call to someone else?" I hung up without responding, my suspicion confirmed. The woman who'd just been in my apartment wasn't FBI. She was someone impersonating federal law enforcement, which meant Gerald had been right about everything. The corruption went deeper than I'd imagined. Coastal Federal Bank, or whoever was behind this, had resources to create fake credentials and send people door-to-door hunting for evidence. I needed to contact the real FBI, but I couldn't do it from my apartment. If fake agents were already tracking me, my phone might be compromised. My internet might be monitored. I needed to go somewhere public, use a different method of communication, and reach out to the actual agents handling this case. I grabbed the cash, the notebook, and a backpack with some essentials. I left my apartment and walked 6 blocks to an internet cafe that stayed open late, the kind of place where college students pulled all-nighters working on papers. I paid cash for an hour of computer time and created a temporary email account. Using the names from Gerald's notebook, I found the official FBI contact information for Special Agent Thomas Reeves and sent him an encrypted email explaining everything. I described my interaction with Gerald Price, the evidence he was transporting, the fake Agent Hartley who'd come to my apartment, and the notebook I now possessed with detailed documentation of the Coastal Federal Bank fraud case. I included my phone number and asked him to call me within the next hour, using a verification code I provided so I'd know he was legitimate. Then I waited, nursing a terrible coffee and watching the door for anyone who looked like they might be searching for me. My phone rang 45 minutes later. "This is Special Agent Reeves," a male voice said. "I got your email. Before we continue, I need you to verify your identity." We went through the verification process I'd set up, confirming that he was who he claimed to be and that I wasn't walking into another trap. Once we were both satisfied, his tone became urgent. "Mr. Coleman, you're in serious danger. The people looking for that evidence have already killed one person today. David Brennan, the man whose briefcase Gerald Price has, was found dead in a parking garage downtown 3 hours ago. Gunshot wound to the head, staged to look like suicide." My stomach dropped. "They killed him?" "They executed him," Reeves corrected. "And they're hunting everyone connected to him. Gerald Price is probably already dead too, which means you're one of the last people who can testify about what happened tonight. I need you to tell me exactly where you are right now so we can bring you in for protection." Everything in me screamed not to trust this, not to reveal my location over the phone, but I was out of options. If Brennan was dead, and Gerald was probably dead, I was next on the list. "I'm at the Digital Hub Internet Cafe on Westlake Avenue," I said. "How long until you can get here?" 15 minutes. Stay inside, stay around other people, don't go anywhere alone. We're sending 2 agents to pick you up. Their names are Jennifer Kwan and Marcus Webb. Don't leave with anyone else, no matter what credentials they show you." He hung up, and I sat at my computer terminal trying not to panic. 15 minutes felt like an eternity when every person who walked through the cafe door could be someone looking to kill me. I kept the notebook hidden in my backpack and my hand on my phone, ready to call 911 if anyone approached me suspiciously. 12 minutes later, 2 people in FBI windbreakers entered the cafe and walked straight toward me. The woman showed me her credentials, Special Agent Jennifer Kwan, exactly as Reeves had described. The man was Marcus Webb, younger, and built like he spent significant time in the gym. "Mr. Coleman?" Kwan asked. "We're here to take you to a secure location. We need to move quickly." I followed them out to an unmarked black sedan parked at the curb. Webb drove while Kwan sat in the back with me, and we headed away from downtown toward the industrial waterfront. "Where are we going?" I asked, noticing we weren't heading toward the federal building. "Safe house," Kwan said. "We can't take you to our office because we believe there's been a security breach. Someone inside either local law enforcement or federal agencies has been feeding information to Coastal Federal Bank about our investigation. Until we identify the leak, we're keeping witnesses isolated in secure locations." That made sense, but it didn't make me feel any safer. I was in a car with 2 people I'd just met, heading to a location I didn't know, trusting that they were who they claimed to be, based on nothing but credentials that could be faked. "Tell me about the notebook," Kwan said. "Your email mentioned Gerald Price gave you detailed documentation." I pulled out the notebook and handed it to her. She flipped through it with a small flashlight, her expression growing more serious with each page. "This is good," she said. "Really good. He documented things we didn't even know about. If this is accurate, we can expand our investigation to include at least 6 additional executives." She showed several pages to Webb, and they exchanged meaningful looks I couldn't interpret. We drove for another 10 minutes before pulling into a warehouse district I didn't recognize. The sedan stopped in front of a nondescript brick building with no windows on the ground floor, and Webb got out to unlock a rolling metal door. We drove inside, and the door closed behind us, sealing us in darkness until overhead lights flickered on. "This is the safe house?" I asked, looking around at what appeared to be an empty warehouse. "Temporary location," Kwan said. "We're moving you to somewhere more secure in about an hour. We just need to debrief you first and make sure we have all the information." Something felt wrong. The timing, the location, the way they were both watching me with expressions that weren't quite right. I took a step back toward the car. "I'd like to call Agent Reeves and confirm this is procedure," I said, pulling out my phone. Webb's hand shot out and grabbed my wrist, gripping hard enough to hurt. "That won't be necessary," he said, his friendly demeanor vanishing completely. "You're going to give us everything Gerald Price gave you, including the $10,000 in your backpack, and then you're going to forget this night ever happened." Kwan pulled out a gun, not FBI issue, something smaller and easier to conceal. "We tried to do this the easy way," she said. "We sent someone to your apartment to pose as FBI and get the evidence voluntarily. You lied to her. You made this complicated. Now we're doing it the hard way." I jerked my wrist free from Webb's grip and ran, not toward the door we'd come through, but deeper into the warehouse. I heard them chasing behind me, footsteps echoing on concrete, but I didn't look back. I dodged between support pillars and stacks of empty pallets, looking for an exit, a window, anything. A gunshot cracked through the air, and I dove behind a concrete barrier, my ears ringing. "We don't want to kill you," Quan called out. "We just want the evidence. Throw out the backpack and walk away. You keep the money, you keep your life. Everyone wins." I stayed crouched behind the barrier, trying to control my breathing. They weren't FBI. They were Apex Protection Services or contractors hired by Coastal Federal Bank, and they'd intercepted my email somehow. They'd posed as federal agents to lure me here, and now I was trapped. My phone was still in my hand, and I quickly texted the real Agent Reeves the address of this warehouse. Then I turned off my phone's ringer and shoved it back in my pocket. I needed to stay alive long enough for actual law enforcement to arrive, which meant I needed to move, stay unpredictable, and not let them corner me. I grabbed a piece of broken pallet and threw it across the warehouse. It clattered against metal, and I heard Webb and Quan move toward the sound. While they were distracted, I ran in the opposite direction, heading toward what looked like stairs leading to a second level. I made it halfway up before Webb spotted me. Another gunshot, this one close enough that I felt the air displacement as the bullet passed near my head. I threw myself up the remaining stairs and found myself in an office area overlooking the warehouse floor, glass windows providing a clear view of everything below. I could see Webb and Quan splitting up, trying to flank my position. I could see the car we'd arrived in, still, parked near the entrance. And I could see something else, a door on the far side of the warehouse, marked as an emergency exit. If I could get back down to the ground floor and make it to that door, I might have a chance. But first, I needed a distraction. I searched the office and found an old metal desk lamp. I threw it through one of the glass windows, and it crashed down to the warehouse floor below. Both Webb and Quan turned toward the sound, and I used those precious seconds to run back down the stairs on the opposite side. I was sprinting toward the emergency exit when Quan cut me off, her gun raised and pointed directly at my chest. "Stop," she ordered. "This is done. Give me the backpack." I froze, hands up, the backpack still on my shoulders. She was 10 feet away, close enough that she couldn't miss if she fired. "The evidence isn't even in the backpack," I said, stalling. "I uploaded it to a cloud server. You shoot me and it automatically gets sent to every news organization in the country." It was a bluff, but she didn't need to know that. Quan's expression shifted, uncertainty crossing her face. "You're lying." "Am I? You really want to take that chance?" Behind her, I saw headlights through the small window in the emergency exit door, cars pulling up outside, multiple vehicles. Quan saw my expression change and glanced behind her, which was the opening I needed. I charged forward, shoulder-checking her hard enough to knock her off balance. Her gun went off, but the shot went wild, and I grabbed the backpack off my shoulders and swung it at her head. The impact sent her stumbling, and I ran for the emergency exit. Webb was behind me now, shouting, but I hit the exit door's crash bar and burst out into the night air. 4 police cars were surrounding the warehouse, lights flashing, officers taking position behind their vehicles. "FBI, drop your weapons!" someone shouted, and I realized these were actual federal agents responding to my text to Reeves. I dropped to the ground with my hands visible, and officers swarmed past me into the warehouse. I heard shouting, more commands to drop weapons, and then silence. An agent helped me to my feet, checking me for injuries. "You're Coleman?" he asked, and I nodded. "Agent Reeves is on his way. You're safe now." They brought me to one of the cars and gave me water while I waited. 20 minutes later, a man in his 50s with gray hair and a weathered face approached and introduced himself as Thomas Reeves. "Hell of a night you've had," he said, sitting beside me. "Tell me everything from the beginning." I walked him through the entire story, Gerald Price handing me the money and notebook, the fake agent Hartley at my apartment, my email to Reeves, the phone call, and the ambush by fake agents posing as Quan and Webb. "The real Quan is back at our office," Reeves said. "She never left the building tonight. Someone intercepted your email and used our names to lure you into a trap. They're getting desperate, which means we're close to something they're afraid of." He pulled out the notebook from where it had been recovered in my backpack. "This is solid documentation. With this and the testimony we already have from other witnesses, we can build a case that brings down everyone involved in the Coastal Federal fraud scheme." "What about Gerald Price?" I asked. "Is he alive?" Reeves nodded slowly. "He is. He contacted us 3 hours ago through a secure channel and arranged a meeting to hand over the briefcase. He's in protective custody now, but he's safe. He told us about you. Said he'd given his documentation to a random passenger for safekeeping. That's how we knew to reach out when you sent the email." Relief washed over me. Gerald had survived. His plan had worked, at least partially. "The people who tried to kill me tonight, who are they?" "Contractors hired by someone high up at Coastal Federal Bank," Reeves said. "We arrested 2 of them in the warehouse, the ones posing as agents. They're talking now, trying to negotiate deals. We'll use their testimony to move up the chain until we reach whoever ordered the hit on David Brennan." He stood up. "You'll need to stay in protective custody for the next few weeks while we finish building our case. We have a secure location where you'll be safe, and you'll eventually need to testify before a grand jury about everything that happened tonight. But after that, you can return to normal life." Normal life seemed impossible after this, but I nodded anyway. They took me to an actual safe house, a suburban home in a neighborhood that looked completely ordinary. 2 agents stayed with me at all times, rotating shifts, keeping me secure while the investigation progressed. For 3 weeks, I lived in a strange, liminal space. I couldn't work, couldn't contact friends or family beyond a few supervised phone calls, couldn't leave the house except for trips to the federal building for depositions. I spent hours giving testimony about every detail of that night, answering questions from prosecutors who were building an airtight case. Gerald Price was in another safe house somewhere, and I never got to see him or thank him for trusting me. But I heard updates about how his evidence was being used. The briefcase he'd taken from David Brennan contained documents proving that Coastal Federal Bank had been involved in a systematic loan fraud scheme worth $70 million. Senior executives had been approving fraudulent mortgage applications, then selling those mortgages to investors while hiding the fraud through complex financial structures. When Brennan had discovered the scheme and threatened to expose it, those executives had hired Apex Protection Services to silence him. The company's board of directors had approved the contract, making them accessories to murder. In total, 18 people were arrested based on the evidence Gerald had preserved and the testimony of witnesses like me. The trial took 8 months, and I attended parts of it, sitting in the gallery watching as prosecutors systematically dismantled the defense's arguments. Gerald testified for 3 days straight, walking the jury through everything he'd discovered and how he'd kept the evidence safe despite multiple attempts on his life. When the verdicts came back, all 18 defendants were found guilty on multiple counts. The bank's CEO got 35 years in federal prison. 3 vice presidents got between 20 and 28 years. The head of Apex Protection Services got life without parole for ordering Brennan's murder. The judge's sentencing statements were scathing, describing the defendants as people who'd betrayed public trust and destroyed lives for profit. After the trial, I met Gerald in person for the first time since that night in his car. We had coffee at a quiet place downtown, both of us trying to process everything that had happened. "I'm sorry for dragging you into this," he said. "I know I didn't give you much choice." I thought about that, about the moment I'd taken the money and agreed to his plan. "You gave me exactly enough choice," I said. "I could have refused, could have gone to police immediately, but I took the money and I chose to trust you. That was on me." Gerald smiled, tired but genuine. "The money. Did you keep it?" I had. The FBI had examined it, confirmed it was Gerald's own savings and not connected to the criminal case, and returned it to me. I'd used it exactly as I'd imagined that first night, paying off debt, covering rent, fixing my car. "I kept it," I admitted. "I figured I earned it." "You definitely did." We talked for another hour about rebuilding our lives after something like this. Gerald had lost his Uber driving job, his car had been impounded as evidence, and he'd spent 8 months in protective custody. But he'd also received reward money from the FBI's whistleblower program, enough to start over somewhere new. He was planning to move to the Pacific Northwest, buy a small house, and retire early. I'd gone back to my compliance officer job, but everything felt different now. I'd seen real corruption up close, had nearly died exposing it, had helped bring down people who thought they were untouchable. 3 months after the trial ended, I got a job offer from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. They wanted someone with my background and recent experience to help investigate corporate fraud. The pay was better than my insurance company job, and the work felt meaningful in a way nothing had before. I accepted, spent 16 weeks at Quantico training, and became the person who helps others in situations like the one Gerald had been in. I investigate banking fraud, document corruption, and build cases against people who abuse power for profit. Sometimes I think about that moment at the red light when Gerald handed me $10,000 and told me to say I'd never seen him. How a single decision made in seconds had changed the trajectory of my entire life. How easily I could have refused and missed everything that followed. The money was spent long ago, but the notebook sits in a frame on my office wall. The FBI returned it after the trial, and I keep it as a reminder that ordinary people can fight systems that seem impossible to defeat. That sometimes the right choice is the one that looks reckless, the one that involves taking money from a stranger and trusting that their desperation is honest. Gerald and I still talk occasionally, phone calls every few months where we check in on each other's lives. He's happy in Oregon, working part-time at a bookstore and living quietly. I'm in Washington now, traveling between field offices and building cases that will hopefully prevent what happened to David Brennan from happening to someone else. The $10,000 changed my immediate circumstances, but the choice to help someone despite the risk changed everything else. I learned that corruption only survives when ordinary people decide it's not their problem, when they take the safe route instead of the dangerous one, when they accept that the system is broken and do nothing to fix it. That night, at the red light, I could have said no. I could have walked away. Instead, I took the money, trusted a stranger, and helped expose a conspiracy that had destroyed lives. Looking back, it was the best decision I ever made, even though it nearly killed me. Because sometimes doing the right thing means accepting money from an Uber driver at a red light and promising to lie to anyone who asks. Sometimes justice starts with a split-second choice that makes no sense until later, when you realize you were exactly where you needed to be. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.